By 1700, Venice was a masterpiece of paradox. To the traveller, she was a miracle of the mud, a city of 140,000 souls suspended between the sky and the salt marsh. To the historian, she was a magnificent fossil. For 900 years, the Serenissima, the Most Serene Republic, had functioned as the hinge of the world, a maritime empire that dictated the terms of trade between Europe and the East. But the 18th century brought a cold reality. The gold of the Levant was being replaced by the silver of the Americas. The Mediterranean was no longer the center of the universe. Yet, as her political and military teeth were drawn, Venice donned a mask of unparalleled splendor. This was her gilded autumn, a century of music, gambling, and artistic peak, played out against a backdrop of slow systemic decay. In the 1700s, the Doge's palace was the engine room of a cooling empire. This Gothic masterpiece was not a residence for a monarch, but a colossal bureaucratic headquarters. The Doge, though cloaked in heavy gold brocade, was a figurehead, a gilded prisoner of the state. He lived in the palace but could not meet foreign dignitaries or open official mail without the presence of his councillors. Real power resided in the Great Council and the Senate, who met in vast halls decorated with the propaganda of past victories. The building also served as the site of the Republic's terrifyingly efficient judicial arm. The Council of Ten met in darkened chambers here, managing state security, counter-espionage, and the suppression of dissent. In the 18th century, the palace was a place of frantic tradition. Even as the Republic's territory shrank, the complexity of its laws increased. It was a government of aging men, obsessed with stability and the preservation of a status quo that the rest of Europe had already abandoned. Within these walls, the Most Serene government maintained a facade of absolute control, relying on a network of secret informants and the legendary lion's mouths, letterboxes, designed to receive anonymous denunciations of treason. In the 18th century, St. Mark's Square was the only space in Venice designated as a piazza. All other squares were merely campi. It functioned as the city's grandest stage and its most vital social filter. Under the elegant arcades of the Procuratie, the world's first modern coffee houses began to emerge. Famous establishments like Café Florian, which opened in 1720, became the centers of Venetian intellectual life and high-stakes gossip. Here, Enlightenment ideas from France and England filtered through the city, discussed by noblemen and travelers over cups of chocolate and coffee. The square was also the site of the Liston, a daily social ritual where the aristocracy paraded in their finest silks, effectively a catwalk of political and social standing. During the 6 months of the annual carnival, the piazza was transformed into a sea of masks. The mask allowed for a temporary suspension of the Republic's rigid social hierarchy. A servant could play the part of a prince, and a nun could visit the gambling dens of the Ridotto nearby. It was a space of carefully managed chaos, where the Republic allowed its citizens to indulge in hedonism to distract them from the city's waning geopolitical relevance. Dominating the square, St. Mark's Basilica served as the Doge's private chapel and the spiritual heart of the Venetian state. Its 5 Byzantine domes and shimmering gold mosaics were not merely religious icons, they were trophies. In the 1700s, the basilica was a physical archive of Venetian history, housing relics stolen from Alexandria and marbles plundered from Constantinople centuries earlier. Inside, the air was thick with incense and the complex polyphonic music of the Cappella Martiana, one of the most prestigious musical institutions in Europe. The building was the primary site for the Republic's civil religion. Every major state event, the election of a Doge, the blessing of the fleet, or the celebration of a military victory, was sanctified within its golden walls. The 18th century saw the basilica become a destination for the grand tour elite, who marveled at its exotic Eastern atmosphere. To the Venetians, The basilica was proof of their divine election. As long as the relics of St. Mark remained within the high altar, the Republic believed itself to be immortal. It was a place where the state's political identity and its spiritual faith were fused into a single blinding display of gold and stone. Rising majestically from the Grand Canal, Ca' Rezzonico is the definitive architectural statement of the 18th century Venetian elite. The Rezzonico family represented the new money of the era. Having purchased their noble title for 100,000 ducats in 1687, they commissioned the greatest architects and painters of the century to build a home that would eclipse the ancient families. The palace was used as a massive social weapon, designed to host the most decadent balls and receptions in the city. Its grand ballroom, the largest in Venice, featured a ceiling fresco by Tiepolo that depicted the family's glory. This Renaissance masterpiece on the Grand Canal served as a high-stakes hub for the 18th century elite. Throughout the 1700s, it was a residence for the Loredan family, one of the apostolic lineages of Venice. These palaces functioned as private embassies. They were the locations where marriage alliances were brokered and financial agreements were struck that kept the city's dwindling wealth within a few select hands. The Loredan Vendrum in Calergi was a site of constant diplomatic networking, where foreign ambassadors were entertained in halls lined with ancestral portraits. During the 18th century, such residences also frequently hosted the ridotti, private, illegal gambling rooms. Gambling was the great vice of 1700s Venice, and noblemen would often lose entire estates in a single night of basset or faraone. The palace was thus a place of both extreme refinement and quiet desperation. It represented the Barnabotti, the impoverished nobility who held on to their titles and their palaces even as their bank accounts vanished. The building's beauty, characterized by its classic arched windows and Istrian stone, masked the internal decay of a class that was increasingly disconnected from the merchant adventurer spirit that had built the city. The House of Gold was already 300 years old by the 1700s, but it remained the most haunting sight on the Grand Canal. Originally, its marble tracery was leafed in real gold and painted in ultramarine blue. By the 18th century, the gold had long since flaked away into the water, and the palace served as a poignant reminder of the Serenissima's mercantile peak. It was used as a residence, but its beauty was increasingly languid. A favorite subject for painters like Canaletto and Guardi, who captured its decaying Gothic elegance for English lords to take home as souvenirs. In the 1700s, the Ca' d'Oro represented the historical memory of the city. While the Rezzonicos were building new, heavy Baroque structures, the Ca' d'Oro stood as a symbol of the old Venice, a time when the city was a lean, hungry trade empire. For the 18th century traveller, it was the epitome of Venetian Gothic, a style that seemed to defy the weight of the stone. Its delicate, lace-like balcony was a place from which noble ladies watched the regattas on the canal, observing a world that was becoming more about spectacle and less about the gritty commerce of the past. Standing on the upper Grand Canal, the Fondaco dei Turchi served as the mandatory residence and warehouse for Ottoman Turkish merchants. In the 1700s, this was a site of strict administrative control. The Republic, ever pragmatic, maintained trade with the Turks even while at war with the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean. The building functioned like a ghetto for trade. Merchants were required to live, pray, and store their goods, wax, oil, wool, and spices, within its walls. It was locked from the outside at sunset by Venetian guards to prevent unauthorized movement and smuggling. The 18th century Fondaco was a hive of multicultural activity, yet it also signaled Venice's declining status. While it remained a vital link for Eastern goods, the volume of trade had diminished as the English and Dutch East India companies began to dominate the global spice markets. The building was a space of surveillance and suspicion, reflecting the Republic's anxiety about its place in the world. Still, the sight of Turkish merchants on the Grand Canal remained a quintessential part of the Venetian experience. A reminder of the centuries when the city was the only gateway through which the riches of the East could enter the heart of Europe. The Rialto was the economic soul of Venice, the site where the Republic's coin was minted, managed and lost. In the 1700s, the stone bridge and the surrounding district functioned as the city's clearinghouse. The shops lining the bridge were the most expensive real estate in the city, selling high-end jewelry, silks, and the famous Venetian theriac, a complex medicine exported across the globe. At the foot of the bridge lay the Banco del Giro, the state-guaranteed bank where credit and exchange rates for all of Europe were once negotiated. Even in the 18th century, as the great trade routes shifted, the Rialto remained a frantic centre of regional commerce. Every morning, the Pescaria, fish market, and Herberia, vegetable market, would overflow with produce from the lagoon and the mainland, feeding the city's 140,000 inhabitants. It was a place of high noise and high stakes, where the shouts of bankers mingled with the cries of fishmongers. For the Venetian government, the Rialto was a barometer of the state's health. As long as the markets were full and the bank was solvent, the Republic could pretend that its golden age had not yet set. It remained the bridge between the city's glorious merchant past and its uncertain, tourist-driven future. The Arsenal was a walled city within a city, the largest industrial complex in the pre-modern world. At its peak, it could produce a fully armed war galley in just 24 hours using a sophisticated assembly line of workers. In the 1700s, however, the arsenal had become a temple to tradition rather than a modern military force. It was used to maintain the Republic's aging fleet and to house the Bucintoro, the Doge's massive gold-plated ceremonial barge used for the marriage to the sea ceremony. The arsenalotti, the shipyard workers, were a hereditary caste of craftsmen who were the only ones trusted to guard the Doge's palace and the treasury. However, the 18th century saw the arsenal falling behind the technological curve. While Britain and France were building massive, copper-bottomed ships of the line, the arsenal was still largely focused on the galley, a ship that required hundreds of oarsmen and was useless in the heavy swells of the Atlantic. The shipyards were still impressive in scale, but they were increasingly focused on repairs and the construction of ceremonial vessels. The arsenal had become a monument to a past era of maritime supremacy, a massive industrial heart that was beating slower with every passing year. Not far from the Doge's palace stands a small enclosed bridge that has become one of the most famous in Venice. The Bridge of Sighs connected the palace to the city's prisons. Prisoners condemned by Venetian courts crossed this passage on their way to confinement. Through its narrow windows, they caught a final glimpse of the lagoon and the rooftops of Venice. The name, given later by writers and travellers, evokes the human stories hidden behind the grandeur of the Republic. In the 1700s, the bridge was a vital part of the Republic's judicial architecture. It was used to move prisoners from the interrogation rooms in the Doge's palace, where the Council of Ten presided, to the new prisons across the canal. These prisons were considered quite modern for the 18th century, though they still housed the infamous Pozzi, the Wells, and the Piombi, the Leads, cells located directly under the lead roof of the palace, where prisoners like Giacomo Casanova were held. The bridge represented the secret, absolute nature of Venetian justice, a system that kept the city remarkably stable and crime-free, but relied on a total lack of transparency and the absolute power of a small aristocratic elite. For centuries, Venice had survived wars, rival empires, and shifting alliances. But the political transformations of the late 18th century proved impossible to resist. In 1797, the armies of Napoleon Bonaparte marched into northern Italy. The Venetian Republic, weakened and unable to defend itself, surrendered without significant resistance. After more than 1,000 years of independence, the Most Serene Republic came to an end. Yet Venice itself endured. Its palaces still rise above the water. Its bridges still connect the islands of the lagoon, and the city remains a living archive of the centuries when a small community built upon mudflats grew into one of the most extraordinary republics in human history. In the quiet reflections of its canals, the memory of that world still survives.